thousands of migrants at the Beitbridge border post, and the Libombo borders are still desperately trying to cross into South Africa. Most of them are returning to various places of work here in South Africa. The migrants are required to be tested for COVID-19 and at the border post, or they are supposed to present a valid test certificate. Now, there were reports earlier this week that some presented fake COVID-19 certificates. South Africa is battling the second wave of the coronavirus, with hospital facilities beginning to run short of beds for patients. Well, joining us now to deliberate on this issue, we are joined by Herman Mashaba. He is the leader of Action SA, and we're also joined by the chairperson of the Africa Diaspora Forum, that's Vusi Sibanda, who talks to us from Durban. Gentlemen, my thanks to you both for joining us this morning. I want to start with you, Mr. Sibanda. The situation at South Africa's borders is fast becoming a humanitarian crisis, as some have described. I wonder what your description of what you are seeing, and where do you apportion the blame for what we are seeing?
Thank you very much. I think it has, the stage of being a humanitarian crisis, from some time in December, when we had numbers of people that died and the number of COVID tests that, we had. We'll remember that shop in Musina, I think about 29 people in one day, that work in that shop tested positive for COVID. So obviously, with those conditions where you don't have appropriate, sanitary conditions, where hygienic, conditions can easily be obtained, that situation, is untenable, especially under, the COVID circumstances that we are living in. Now, in our view, we think that, especially now also, that when we're talking about people that are coming back, and of course we know that there's been curfews starting from in December and up to now. For example, borders are getting closed around 9-10. And we think that that is where the first port of call should be when it comes to apportioning blame. Considering that, for example, all the governments, say, for example, in Beitbridge, the Zimbabwean government and the South African government are closing the border posts. I think that both governments are being careless, in the sense that they would have known, and they know that during the festive season, the influx, the population of people that are crossing the border are very, very high. Now, to therefore go on and say, close the borders, when they know that during the course of the day, people travel and they all come to the border where they should be processed for crossing over. In fact, what should be happening is that, considering that there is COVID, which requires proper social distancing, both governments would have increased the number of people or operatives at the border post to ensure that people do not end up crowding and, becoming, such huge crowds at the border post. So I think that the governments really don't care about the people, and they are not concerned about the impact that this has on the people. Because once those people that are there, one of them has got COVID, it means that it's going to be spread to many, many other people. And that goes to whichever country that they are going to. And that also puts the lives in danger of those people that are working for the government. So I think that the biggest blame goes to all the governments that are closing their borders and that are not increasing the number of staff, the staff that are working at the border posts.
Right, Mr. Mashaba, before I come to you, I understand that our reporter, Pilane Phakadi, who is stationed at the Beitbridge border post, he is now on the line for us. Pilane, very good morning to you. Explain what the situation is there right now.
Well, just despite being kicked out of the border this morning, the situation is that thousands of people are queuing in the Beitbridge Zimbabwe side, trying to gain access into South Africa. Now their COVID-19 results, or should I say their COVID-19 certificates, have expired. They've been on the queue since Monday. Now the regulations are the results must be 48 hours old, and if they are are over 48 hours old, then they will be declared expired. So people currently inside the border, they are retaking those particular COVID-19 tests within the border, of course, sponsored by South Africa for 170 rands per test, and all of them there, of course, are complaining that they've been waiting on the queue for about 4 days, no food, no water whatsoever. And while they are forced to buy those essentials some kilometers away, either back into Zimbabwe where they are from, it is becoming a little bit of a crisis if they still have to spend around 170 rands on the border once they come in to get those tests. And once they are negative, of course, they will then be allowed to come into South Africa. But Xoli, something that Newzroom Afrika does understand is that there has been positive cases reported within the crowds that you've seen yesterday when we were crossing live to you. And all now begs the question about that particular crisis that you and I were talking about, on whether isn't the area perhaps becoming a super spreader, because while people are waiting on those long queues, they then become more viable to be spreading the disease while waiting to perhaps give the current certificate that they have, to have it declared null and void and retake other COVID-19 tests.
All right, Pilane, very, very briefly, are you able to see from the Zimbabwean side of things as to how many officials are there, government officials I mean, and how many are they that are assisting the nationals?
I don't know if you were still asking your questions, but I'm sorry if you have jumped in, but I've lost you. But as briefly as I can, I'd say to you that inside the queues that we've seen currently have subsided as opposed to the ones that we've seen yesterday. And what we have seen now is that the only queues is from, I'd say, about 100 people that we've seen just before we left inside the border, about 100 people waiting to have their COVID-19 test taken so that they can be given access to the country. And if they are positive, they will then be humbly asked to return back into Zimbabwe.
All right, Pilane Pakati, thank you very much for that update. Well, let's bring into the conversation Mr. Herman Mashaba, now leader of Action SA. Mr. Mashaba, you've heard our reporter describing what the situation is at least at the Beitbridge border post. You have complained about what you say, and I quote, is a weak South African immigration policy and porous borders. Hearing what you have heard from our reporter and from Mr. Sibanda, where do you apportion the blame for what we're seeing?
Well, I think, first of all, the number one culprit in this matter is the South African government. I'm sure, Xoli, you remember on the 22nd of October 2019, I reported to Parliament on the dysfunctional state of our home affairs over the last roughly 15 years. On the 1st of December 2016, when I was giving 100 days report of my mayorship, I raised this issue of undocumented foreign nationals in South Africa that is posing a very, very serious threat to the sovereignty and the security of South Africa. But then people decided and opted to call me names and insults instead of actually dealing with this particular matter. So the first blame, without any doubt, unapologetic about it, goes to South Africa, because South African laws do not allow people to really come here unless they meet certain requirements. Now you ask yourself, people asking for South African asylum, but during the festive season and so forth, they can go back to their respective countries and come back. What kind of system is this? Because if you're asking for asylum in a particular country, that means obviously your life is in danger in your home country. But for you to obviously bring in an issue of asylum seeking when it suits you, I mean, this is totally unacceptable. South Africa cannot really be a country that hosts everyone in the world when we have 18 million of our people who actually have to really survive on grants from government. We have under 50% unemployment of our own people. We've got our own serious challenges. Our hospitals are full. are full with patients. Our people are dying of COVID. We cannot really be the country for the world. I think first preference, and I think we need to be unapologetic about this, must be given to South Africans. Anyone who's in this country illegally must be sent back to their respective countries.
Mr. Mashaba, and to you, Mr. Vusi Sibanda, I want for you to remain where you are. We're going to take a short breather, and can I ask you very, very patiently to please remain where you are? We are going to go into a developing story very quickly. This is Newsfeed. You have heard Herman Mashaba essentially saying that people are using the excuse that they are asylum seekers coming to South Africa because of political persecution or other reasons, whereas in actual fact, the issue here is that of economic migrants that are seeking a better life. The question to you is whether South Africa can shoulder the problems of its neighbors.
Thank you very much. I think maybe to start with, there is a confusion, I think, that is coming from Mr. Mashaba when he says that people come here under the assumption that they are seekers, and then in December they flock back to their country. There are different types of migrants that we've got in South Africa. We've got your refugees and asylum seekers, and then we've got your economic migrants that are here on various permits. And in Zimbabwe, we've got about almost 200,000 Zimbabweans that got what we call the Zimbabwe dispensation permit, which were issued by the South African government, including the ones in Lesotho. Those are the people that I think he's referring to that are traveling in and out of the country. And that is why, even when they are coming in now, they come through the border, they get their passport stamped because they've got those permits. So I think he must not confuse those two things. Asylum seekers are not in that category. And when you then look at the problem as to whether South Africa can really shoulder the problems of other countries, and as to whether, we can squarely say that the immigration department, for example, is at fault. I think sometimes it is expedient. I'm sure it's political expedience, that is used in political circles. But if you look at South Africa, and we have said this every now and again, that if you look at South Africa and the bulk of its borders, that they are landlocked, and the neighboring countries have got serious problems, which he refers to as economic, migrants. It is a very huge problem to really say, can South Africa manage to close these borders for these people not to come into South Africa? It is almost impossible, especially considering that the neighboring countries that surround South Africa, they have got very bad economic, conditions, poor standards of living, high levels of unemployment, such serious political instability like Zimbabwe and other neighboring countries like maybe DRC that are not too far off. So with that kind of a situation, it will almost be impossible to stop these people coming in. Even if you build a 20-foot, 30-foot, wall, people would still dig under and come in. We've got people jumping into the Limpopo River that is infested with crocodiles, where they know that they are facing death, but they jump in to cross over. So we need a broader and a more fair approach, rather than to say, let's blame that on the Department of Home Affairs or just on the government of AC. We need an approach that says, how do we solve this regional problem so that South Africa does not become the only one that bears the brunt of the economic problems that the southern region is basically facing?
Yeah, Mr. Mashaba, you've heard Mr. Sibanda, and I want to challenge you a bit about this issue being laid at the door of the South African government. How much responsibility must the Zimbabwean government shoulder here?
A lot. I think if I look at what ZANU-PF has done to destroy that beautiful country with massive potential over the last 20 odd years, it's actually, it is evil. It's more than criminal, because Zimbabweans, if they were led by credible people committed to public service, Zimbabweans would not really need to really come to South Africa. Just 25 years ago, Zimbabwe used to be the bread breadbasket of Southern Africa. But unfortunately, when ZANU-PF's political leadership was threatened by the Zimbabweans, that's when they started with human rights abuses that led the Zimbabweans to leave their country. This whole issue of land grabs, that's already what created this problem. But at the end of the day, do the world or anyone expect South Africa to shoulder the responsibility? Absolutely not. We have under 50% of our own people who are suffering, who are without jobs, with hospitals full. So South Africa cannot really take that responsibility. Let the African Union and anyone else who's interested in resolving this matter go and deal with those problems of those countries and leave us alone as South Africa to deal with our own problem. And without any doubt, as South Africa, we want to assist other countries, but we will assist them in their own countries. We have to really deal with our own issues.
Mr. Sibanda, how do you respond to that?
Well, look, I think it's very unfortunate because, again, if we are looking at a solution, for example, you talk of ZANU-PF, what we are saying is Zimbabwe is not an island, and neither are all these poverty-stricken countries. We need all these countries that are neighbors to get involved in the problems that these countries have, especially the ones that cause instability, within the region. Now, if we are looking at that, we need to say, if we can simply say today, the attitude is that let South Africa face its own problems and try and close our way. Let's talk about the very simple example that we're talking about of COVID right now. If we try today to say, let the people that are being tested for COVID, South Africa has actually reduced, I think, the fares if people are paying 170. Those people that cannot afford that 170 to pay for COVID, the next thing that they will do is to not use the port of entry that is designated, and they will go via the river and cross into South Africa. Those people that will be stopped by other problems, from coming in, or that have been staying and they are, they no longer have money, they will choose and opt to go and use undesignated port of entry. And where does that leave South Africa? It means then all those people that are positive will come here and continue to spread, the COVID disease. But if the governments were working together, we would have Zimbabwean government and South African government, for example, having a big tent on the Zimbabwean side and on the South African side to say, once a person has been tested to be positive, let us not just send them back and say, go back. Because once you send a person to say go back when they really want to come back, into South Africa, they will go and use an alternative method, but quarantine the person immediately to stop the spreading.
Mr. Mashaba, the South African government, even at political party level, the ANC going across to ZANU-PF to try and have a conversation about the situation in Zimbabwe that most times affects South Africa. Based on these interactions that we've seen over a number of years and months, do you see a proper working relationship between the South African government and the Zimbabwean counterparts?
I don't really see any. In fact, I see actually the aggravation of the situation, because if you look at the ZANU-PF and the ANC, they come from the same WhatsApp group. So whatever negotiations that they are having is actually to perpetuate the suffering and human rights abuses of our people. If ANC or anyone else in the world is serious about resolving and finding a solution to the Zimbabwean situation, let's call for free and fair elections supervised by the international community, because the reason why we have this massive problem in Zimbabwe is because ZANU-PF, with the support of the ANC, stole the elections of Zimbabwe. They are committing massive human rights abuses in Zimbabwe. So anyone who is not going to really deal with the problem at that level, you'll never find a solution. And unfortunately, please don't expect South African citizens like me and others to really shoulder that responsibility. So the ANC and ZANU-PF, this come from the same WhatsApp group. So whatever negotiations that they're going to have under closed doors, there is nothing that you're going to get except actually the exacerbation of this challenge.
Mr. Sibanda, I'm always curious to know, why is it that the Zimbabwean nationals choose South Africa as their destination whenever they experience problems? Or is it perhaps ignorance on our part that the Zimbabwean nationals are not going to Botswana, for example, or should we say Mozambique? Why is South Africa the chosen destination?
I think the first thing is that we need to acknowledge that South Africa is actually the economic, has got better economics and opportunities in a way, in Africa, not only maybe Southern Africa. And even if Botswana has got a strong currency, but it is very small and does not have as much opportunities. One of the major reasons why, obviously, Zimbabweans will choose to come to South Africa is because they can easily get, better, opportunities here. And of course, we've got ties. Like, for example, when you speak of the Ndebele-speaking people that, always say, look, they came from, South Africa. So language issues also come into play where they'll easily feel much at home when they're in South Africa. And the size of the country, South Africa being this big, increases opportunities. So obviously that becomes the first port of call. Of course, those relationships that we had between ANC and ZAPU during the struggles and the fact that the countries were collaborating, we know we had that also with Frelimo in Mozambique. But the greater collaboration that we have seen, between these two countries in the past and also having a bit of an understanding makes it a lot easier for the people of Zimbabwe to come here. But I will agree with Mr. Mashaba when he says that ZANU-PF and ANC, have got culpability. Some of the greatest problems that are faced by Zimbabwe, it has been the failure of the government of ANC to realize that the impact of Zimbabwe continuously, going to the dogs will negatively impact South Africa. And that is a very huge problem.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, time is against us. I must thank the both of you, Vusi Sibanda, Chairperson of the Africa Diaspora Forum, and Herman Mashaba, the leader and founder of the newly formed political party in South Africa, Action SA. Well, I'm told that there are some tweets that I may have to present to you before we go to the 11 o'clock hour. And I see that there is one there, and it is on this very subject on the Beitbridge border post, and someone tweeting that no social distancing happening there. Another super spreader heading into South Africa. That's according to Zita Castajo. And I hope I've said that name correctly. Another tweet from JC McFarlane. Okay, back to Beitbridge border post. How are we going to solve this? We need to prevent access to those who didn't follow the correct process and who don't have papers. It is called immigration control. Last one is from the EFF Deputy President, Floyd Shivambu. And he says, what's happening in Beitbridge is unacceptable and once again exposes the perennial incompetence of Home Affairs Minister Motsoaledi. Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, is this what your government does to Africans who are not forbidden by any law to cross the border? That's a question from Floyd Shivambu, EFF Deputy President.